what really we would like to do is just to explain a case study or a very pragmatic approach to public diplomacy with the work that we are doing with the SDG Fund. So I'm going just to try to explain very brief what the SDG Fund is trying to do and what we did during the last years, which I think is a very clear example of our efforts on public diplomacy with the help of the public diplomacy experts group that we created some years ago, where we have Maria Teresa Laporte from the University of Navarre, and also we have Ian from your organization, that he was not able to be here today, but they really support a lot the work that we are trying to do. So as you already saw in the video, we created the fund at the end of 2014, just trying to prepare the new agenda for development approved by the General Assembly in September 2015. When I say we, I'm talking about the UNDP on behalf of the UNDG, the UN Development Group. As you know, UNDP was up to maybe 6 months ago the chair of the UN Development Group, meaning that UNDP was the responsible to coordinate the work of all the agencies working for development. So UNDP, on behalf of the UNDG, prepared the signature of the administrative agreement with the government of Spain to use an initial contribution from Spain in order to support the implementation of the new agenda. So with this initial seed, this initial contribution, the fund started the work. Now the fund has 22 countries contributing also with the work of the fund through matching funds and also with some direct contributions. But in any case, the work of the fund was organized like in a double track. I mean, in one way, we implement specific projects in the field. I think that Maria Teresa also, already mentioned one of the programs that we are implementing in the case of Ecuador, but we have, as I say, 22 programs in 22 different countries, including also seeds, which, as you know, is one of the priorities now with the new agenda. We have a program in Fiji, another one in Vanuatu, and another one in Samoa. So the idea of the projects is just to put all the actors together, trying to implement the agenda, where I think that in the new agenda, we need to change a little bit the narrative from the previous agenda, in the sense that we need to introduce two important things. First, that the agenda now is universal, is not an approach from the north to the south, if I can use this terminology. It's just a universal agenda, meaning that in all the countries, even in donor countries, there are a lot of inequalities, groups of people living in poverty, meaning that we need to work in all the countries, of course with different challenges, but the agenda is really universal. And then at the same time, with this idea that the agenda is universal because poverty is a social problem, we need to engage all the actors. So with this idea in mind, in our joint programs, we try to have not only member states, but also private sector, civil society, and for sure the agencies of the UN implementing the programs in the field. One of the requirements is to have at least 2 or 3 agencies of the UN working together in the field, meaning that now we are working with 16 agencies of the UN. But then at the same time that we really do our substantive work with the implementation of the joint programs, in the other track, we try really to prepare a kind of advocacy strategy, a public diplomacy strategy, trying to explain how to engage other actors working with us in the implementation of the agenda, as member states already approve, but it's not easy. You mentioned many things about the work with the private sector. We created a small group of companies, private sector advisory group, trying to see how can we co-create and co-design and co-implement the programs together. It's not just the idea to have different actors contributing with resources to the implementation of the agenda, is to see where are the responsibilities of every actor in order to implement the agenda. So With the private sector, we did, as you mentioned, we did different tools. I don't think that we can talk about reports, because reports, it sounds a little bit theoretical, but we really try to have real tools, trying to discuss with the private sector companies, how can we work together? What are really the added value of the private sector in order to implement the agenda? Also keeping in mind that in the private sector, the idea is not only to claim for philanthropy contributions, it's just to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies, which is a completely different approach and much more substantive approach that needs really a specific strategy for communication, which is part of the public diplomacy efforts that we are trying to do. But at the same time that we engage with the private sector, we are also working with civil society that probably has a very long story, working with member states in order to implement the agenda. And sometimes it's much more complicated to talk to actors that traditionally didn't work with the UN. I'm thinking, for instance, in all the work that we are doing on gastronomy, which is one of the new creative industries. I mean, in the fund, the first thing that we did, it was just to promote the appointment of the Roca Brothers, the best restaurant in the world, at least for 2 years, trying to see how can we engage them in order to explain the importance of sustainable cooking, the importance to really prepare the food in the right way to ensure food security and nutrition, and so on. So in fact, the brothers are working with us in a specific program that we are implementing in Nigeria, where we are going to Nigeria to teach the farmers how to use the tomato in the best way and how to commercialize the tomato in the best way in an area where probably Nigeria is one of the first countries as producer of tomato, but unfortunately they don't have the skills and the tools to really preserve the tomato in the right way and therefore to commercialize the tomato. So we are trying to put all the actors together. I think that the experience of the fund was really very positive in the sense that after 2 years, I think that, our projection is that in June we will have 5 million beneficiaries, which is really something, nothing compared with the needs, but at least it's something. But the main challenge was how can we communicate that? How can we really explain, as yesterday we discussed here, that development is really an important tool for preventive diplomacy and that without development is very complicated to promote peace. So the idea was to create a public diplomacy experts group and try to discuss with them how can we prepare the narrative in order to explain not only the transition from the MDGs to the SDGs, but also to explain the agenda and all the challenges that the new agenda has in order to engage actors that are working for development, but they usually didn't work with the UN. So the idea is not that the private sector will replace the member states or member states will be replaced by civil society, but really the challenge is try to see where are the synergies in order to work together and to have a bigger impact thinking about the beneficiaries, because the goal of all the work that we are trying to do is really to improve the life of the people in need, which is at the end the main goal for all the things related to development. So I think that the case of the fund, as Maria Teresa mentioned, we try to disseminate as much as possible all the products that we have now with our joint programs. And in fact, we have, you can check that, an online library with all the products that we are receiving from the joint programs, meaning that, it's important to have an academic approach or a theoretical approach about the goals, but we thought that maybe it will be an added value really to have also the inputs from the implementation of the programs in the field where the real challenges are. So with all this, we have now in the site, in these 2 tracks that I try to explain in a very disorganized way, but anyway, the joint programs. In the side of advocacy, we have now the work with private sector, with creative industries, with civil society, with universities and think tanks, that also we created the chair for SDGs, where also Unitary is supporting a lot. And the idea is try to see how can we engage all of them, but how can we communicate the positive impact to work with all the actors in order really to eradicate poverty, that at the end is the main goal of the agenda. So apologies, because I think that it was a little bit chaotic, the presentation, but at least I tried to give you like an accurate picture about what we are trying to do in order really to promote public diplomacy. Thank you.